To begin? Joel, you're on? All right. I'm going to call our meeting to order. We did the Pledge of Allegiance once, so I don't think we need to do that again. And I'm looking for a motion to approve our agenda.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Tom, our meeting overview. What are we doing here today exactly?
Okay, if I could just check to make sure Commissioner Bleinberg's on. If you can speak again, Commissioner Bleinberg, we didn't hear you the first time.
You there, Jen? We're not hearing you if you are, so keep talking, say the Pledge of Allegiance, I don't know. Sing the alphabet song. We're still working on it.
Oh, no, I didn't. Okay, why is this toolbar hidden? Okay, try again, please.
Oh, we see your lips moving, we still can't hear you. Nothing yet.
Oh, okay. It's probably this one. Okay, try one more time.
Hear me now?
Yeah, oh, hey, there you are. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you all.
All right, now we can begin. Our agenda says we should be done by 5:30. No, we're not going to be done by 5:30. Okay.
Bear with us a second here. All right, thank you. Sorry about that. So the agenda today, fairly straightforward. So you had your first budget meeting last week. You were provided an overview of basically our financials, human resources, and then some long-range forecast models and also means of finance. So today, I think, probably the best course of action for the commission and per the agenda is to lead off with a discussion about the staffing requests, vehicle requests, and outside agency requests. From there, we'll move into a discussion about the highway fund, also begun last week. After that, Susan will provide an overview of debt service and the building fund. She'll also provide an overview of ARPA spending. So that was a question by the commission in previous meetings and also last week, just to see what we're looking like as we get towards the end of this year and certainly into next year. And Susan will wrap up with the long-range financial projection and also the means of finance. Now, the financial projection and means of finance are identical to the ones that you saw last week. So what we would expect towards the end of the meeting is to receive some direction from the commission or just wrap up some decisions or direction already provided insofar as what particular items to insert into the budget. And then also discuss what next week's meeting would look like, whether you want to include it within the regular commission meeting or have a separate meeting as we are today. So with that, I do want to note that we have department heads here for if you have questions about staffing requests and vehicle requests. And I'll just call Carrie up to kind of recap the staffing requests and turn it over to the commission.
All right. Hello again, Carrie.
Good morning again. Just as a quick recap, you probably recall that you were looking at 12 requests for new positions. The list is in front of you. The total cost per position is listed. And then because some of them involve a request for multiple staff, that final column is the total. A couple items to point out. The multiple requests are the 2 investigators at the PDO and the 2 paralegals at the State's Attorney's Office and the 3 juvenile correctional officers at JDC. Another note on the JDC positions is that those 3 JCO1s are being requested for mid-year. So if you approve those, Jamie is only requesting a July start. The last thing that maybe bears some comment here is the inventory specialist out at the highway is shown as having a cost of $83,992. But if that is approved, Steve would be able to eliminate some of the variable hour budget, so that would be offset by a reduction of about $20,598. And again, just to recap that the grant-funded position at the bottom is just to keep that position on your radar in case the grant isn't approved for some reason, but our hope is that that'll be approved and the funding will continue for next year as it has for this year.
I have just one question.
Please.
So last night, when I was trying to think about this a little bit, I just got confused and I should have reached out to somebody, but, so there's a victim witness assistant in the top group, and then there's the grant-funded victim witness assistant at the bottom, and that's the same position.
It's different positions. So the one at the bottom is the existing grant-funded position that was approved last July that is paid 25% by the general fund and 75% by the grant. The only reason we list grant-funded positions for you is just knowing that they have a budget impact if the grant is for some reason not continued. That one is being requested to continue. We anticipate that it will. It's programmed into the budget. The one at the top is a new request. So Daniel's requesting 2 paralegals and 1 victim witness assistant.
Oh, I thought it was one and the same. So, okay, I was
Good
confused.
question,
Okay. Okay. So, go ahead. Good.
I just, one framework comment to think about this, and maybe this cuts more into our forecast and it's more of a question for Susan than Carrie, but as you guys are working on projections going forward, and I appreciate the department heads and their memos, not only outlining what they think they need this year, but kind of projecting out. So in theory, we could consolidate those and see what staffing projection needs are 2 to 5 years from now. But I know in your forecast, you've built in just the general ballpark concept of not saying which positions, but $750,000 of new positions in 26, 27, 28, et cetera. And I would just note that when you take, for the general fund, when you take out the highway positions, we get to about $750,000 in this year. So not saying to my colleagues that we should definitely approve all the positions. I think we should weigh their merits, individually, and maybe we approve some or all of them on their own merits. But I think that would give some guidance to department heads too going forward. If we build the future forecast on 750,000, they can kind of come together and say, what are our highest priorities? And we think we'll have, if we can rank order our priorities and get together and we can stay within 750,000, we're at least going to match the forecast more or less. And so I'm just wondering if that's a valid rule of thumb or what some of my colleagues think about that. But otherwise, I think as a commission, we still need to reserve the right to approve FTEs one by one and kind of a line item veto, if you will. But at least department heads knowing that they're in the ballpark. But if they had asked for twice as many FTEs as this, then we'd probably need to have a reckoning of that we're going to not be able to approve all of those. But I think this is a reasonable list, and I think I can make the case for or against a couple positions potentially. But just know that I think in the ballpark framing of the budget, this is a pretty reasonable request is my starting point.
All of them or part of them?
Yes, I would say all of them. I think, again, we can kind of go one by one and make some discussions, but I think it's about $750,000 for the new staffing requests that hit the general fund budget.
905,000, isn't it?
Yep, so 2 of those are highway positions that you would take out. Those would hit the highway budget, highway fund.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well,
But yeah, if you want to take any ones that you have specific concerns on, and we can go one by one or line by line, however.
and that's the question then. Do we want to just go item by line item by line item? We only got 6, 7, whatever. Any objections to a veteran service officer? I think that one's fairly low hanging fruit. And in my mind is a very justifiable request, and I'd be in favor of that one.
I think,
We should, for me, it'd be easier to talk about any ones that people are not in favor of.
Okay. You want to start?
Well, I would start by generally agreeing with Commissioner Hickley, but I don't necessarily see any of these that, are not justified currently. Taking out the highway, which I'd like to talk about separately.
Mm-hmm.
But the remaining, I don't have a strong feeling that any of them should be eliminated.
Okay.
But if we're gonna start talking about them, they'll somehow fight harder for them.
yeah,
Okay.
that's fair.
So I'm hearing two saying, take out the highway because it's a separate fund. The justifications seem reasonable, and to move forward, Commissioner Benega, before you put that in your mouth. Any comments?
I think it's gonna be the first step in trying to get to a number, so we can look at that and say yes, and then move forward.
Okay, so,
But there may be adjustments based on what that final number looks like.
okay, so we'll include all the staffing requests outside of highway, and let's talk about highway then.
Mr. Chair, my comment on highway was I'd be supportive of those. I think the inventory specialist is just a better, more efficient use of a person, and it doesn't have the full cost there. But the mechanic, I think part of that is embedded in that is the idea of going to a centralized fleet, which we haven't. Is Steve here? I don't.
Yes,
maybe
he
he's
is.
behind the pole from my perspective. Yes, maybe if Steve can just give us the update. I think bringing those services in house and having our own mechanic do the work versus. I think Steve could make the case that it's more cost efficient, but also just kind of the generalized update from Steve or Tom where we are on centralized fleet and if that will come to fruition in this budget year we're talking about.
Steve Groen, Highway Superintendent. It's on the third mechanic is only partially a response to centralized fleet. It's more of a response to the fact that we have two really capable mechanics right now, and they're doing more and more of the work in-house. And we're finding if you send a heavy truck out or a piece of equipment out for repairs, you're looking at $200 an hour and more downtime. Recently, our mechanic Elliott rebuilt an international water truck, and we did some cost comparisons, and we figured just the fact that he did that in-house, it was a 3-week project, hard finding parts, but we figured we saved about $20,000 doing that in-house. Well, the more both mechanics have indicated another set of hands, they can do even more. So we're looking at holistically what we need for the highway department, a centralized fleet. Yeah, if that does become to fruition, and Tom could maybe update you on that. Yeah, if we're doing services and other repairs, yeah, third mechanic would be even more helpful then. But independent of central fleet, I think we can justify that third mechanic right now.
You have the room?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you remind me on how much stuff you are sending currently outside to be done by contractors?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Benega, last year we sent out just like the transmissions and that kind of specialty work, but most all the engine work and repair work we've done in-house. But we had about half of the number of equipment go out for external repairs than we did in previous years, just because we did more internally.
So how much dollar amount is that you're sending out to a vendor?
Fred had figured right around $200,000 we sent out last year.
And you think you're gonna be able to do all that in-house now with this additional person?
Transmissions and stuff wouldn't still need to be sent out, but it would be even less that we'd have to send out in the future. We used to send out tire mounting and balancing and all that stuff, and we got them the equipment to do it. They're doing everything in-house for the most part.
When are we gonna have the centralized purchasing conversation complete?
It's currently under review. I just want to point out that for the and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, for the inventory specialist, so first of all, the centralized fleet, it's the increase to the workload in highway would be marginal, about 30, sedans and SUV type vehicles. The inventory specialist part, position in particular, I think is more largely focused on inventory control, obviously, for assets throughout the county. But, I think it's a smart move. And to answer your question, once we get everything reviewed, it'll come before the commission.
So, like in the next month, the next couple months?
Hopefully within the next couple months.
Steve, mechanics are kind of possessive about their tools and don't like to share and that type of thing. Does the mechanic come with his own tools? Are we buying a lot of tools when we hire a third position?
Mr. Chair, we supply the tools for the mechanics, so the third position would require the purchase of another toolbox and another set of hand tools, which we do have money in our parts budget for.
About how much?
It'd be a guess, but probably about $50,000 in parts.
50?
50. Okay. Just those tool chests are incredibly expensive.
Expensive, yes. And like I said, mechanics are kind of possessive about their tools, so, okay. And you have that in your budget somehow?
Yeah, we have tools in our budget, and they cover anything to do in the highway, and we're confident we can cover it between this year and next year.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, I'd say that's to my satisfaction. I would approve the two positions requested by Highway at this point.
Jen, we haven't asked you for feedback. You want to talk to any of this?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I would agree with the previous commissioner's sentiments. I think we're able to probably pick things apart a little bit, but to Commissioner Kipley's point, if we're staying under the 750,000 and the majority of our positions outside of highway come back to public safety, and we know we can just expect that those positions are going to be very well used, unfortunately. So for all the positions and the highway positions, I would not be opposed. Also, given the opportunity, if any other commissioners have any other perspectives.
All righty, thank you. Any opposition to either of the highway positions?
My only concern, and excuse me, I'm losing it. When I walk through your facility and walk through the parking lot, we have very little used equipment anymore. I mean, we literally have top-notch equipment. So how much of the time is the new person going to actually be working is my question. And that's why I asked the question about outside vendors. Because if we're not going to reduce the outside vendors to literally zero, or maybe a few specialty things, I don't see it as a really swap of economics, to be honest.
It would strictly be transmissions and the specialty things, alignments, things like that we'd be sending out, but right now there's a backlog of equipment. It looks like we have a lot of new equipment. Yeah, we do have a lot of new equipment, but we also have a lot of trucks that get a lot of miles on, plow trucks that are 8-10 years old, and we have a lot of trailers and other equipment, heavy equipment that's 8, 10, 15 years old, and they take a lot of maintenance. Just having our 2 tractors out mowing this summer, they're constantly coming in for repairs. It's pretty high use. The one tractor is 10 years old, the other one is 7 years old. We do have a lot of equipment that does need regular maintenance, and a lot of trailers that were never inspected in the past. My predecessor didn't think we needed to do annual inspections. They take a lot of time, and that's something we're starting to do the last couple of years also. They're always busy.
You think it's close to a wash, if you don't mind me asking, Commissioner?
I believe we'd save money by getting the third mechanic.
Other comments on highway department staffing? Maybe a little slight opposition, but at this point, I'm going to suggest that we include it in the budget and maybe revisit it.
It's fine. I guess the other piece of that is we just had to go through a reduction of $3.1 million, and we were able to make that work in the highway department. How does that affect your other positions that frankly were asked for?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Benega, we were able to take care of that with equipment and delaying projects. We didn't have to do anything personnel-wise to make up for that accounting error.
Okay, well, we'll probably talk about that again. Excuse me, sorry.
All righty. Moving on then to vehicle requests.
Susan Beeman with the Auditor's Office. The list of vehicles and equipment is fairly short this year. I can scroll down. The Sheriff's Office is the only department requesting dollars for vehicles within the general fund. They're requesting for one investigator vehicle as well as 6 patrol vehicles, total of $340,000. The museum enterprise is requesting $50,000 for a Ford van. Most of that will be funded per Bill Hoskins' request with dollars from the store fund. And then additionally, Highway is requesting 4 vehicles that total just over $663,000. So representatives are here from each of those departments if you have any questions for them. These 3 requests for each of these departments are included in the budget that you have seen. So if you decide to not approve any of them, that would be a budget reduction that we would take out of the budget.
Are the sheriff's vehicles pretty much in line with past years? I mean, is that about what we spent historically?
Correct. There's usually a general routine replacement, which they evaluate each year which ones need to be replaced. Captain Bossman is here if you want to hear more about how they evaluate that, but they do usually put some dollars in the budget every year just because those vehicles are heavily used out on the roads. And so they just know that that's part of their routine that they have to do to keep up with their vehicle needs.
Okay. And they're not driving them like they're stuntmen in the movies, so I think we're pretty good. All righty. Any questions, comments on vehicle funding? Jen, anything? Not hearing you. There you are.
I don't have any objection to any of the vehicle and equipment requests.
Okay. So until we get to really that bottom line, we're going to probably leave them where they are. I think they've been pretty well vetted internally with liaisons and so forth. So I think the big one, or the fun talking one, is going to be our outside agency requests. So let's delve into that.
Okay. So the list in front of you are outside agency requests. They're summarized into different categories. The first one is mandated by state statute. That won't change for a number of years because that changes with the census. Contract and dues are those such as the Humane Society for Animal Control and CCOG dues. Both of those changes, because they're contract related, have been updated in the budget. Obviously, the Humane Society contract won't come forward to you till the end of the year for renewal, at which point you guys could have more dialogue on that fee. But at this point, that increase in that fee has been included in the budget. I think the area of biggest discussion for the commission are those in that donation section. And as Melinda indicated last week, there were a few different ones that were kind of identified. So I'll maybe turn it over to the commission to see if, which areas you'd like to dive in closer on the outside agency donations.
All right. How you guys want to handle outside agency requests? I have in my mind kind of some that I'd like to support a little more, them being, one being ambulance, but I'll turn it over to your suggestions, how you want to visit about these things.
I'm open to calling out ones that were that were interested in possibly
Okay.
increasing, and then leaving the conversation focused on what, if any, we're interested in increasing. And I would be on board with increasing the donation to the ambulance, since those are services that benefit the county as a whole. And it's a group that we've tried to historically support. I'm not sure I'm going to be in favor of many more increases other than that.
Okay. Can you talk about ambulances?
I'll echo the ambulance as the liaison to that group. I've been advocating for them. They had a rationale for the $90,000 per Del Rapids, Garrettson, and Humboldt, respectively. They mentioned they're helpful with some historical knowledge, since I'm still a relatively new member, but they said that that was their high water mark maybe a decade ago. They did get 90,000 per, so they're just in there. So holding constant for things like inflation or whatnot, that just nominally getting them back to where they had been in the past. I'll kind of lay down a marker. We gave them 2 fairly substantial increases the past 2 years, so won't let them get completely used to that. But it's I think getting them to 90,000, and then we'll have to vet year by year after that. But I'm definitely supportive of getting them to the 90,000 number that they requested for this year.
I would be supportive of that as well.
Okay. I see about 5 heads nodding, so we'll leave the ambulance there. Okay.
So we'll increase that to 90,000 for each of the ambulance
Correct.
services as
A
requested.
$15,000 increase per service. Yep.
Okay.
Now, let's talk about the domestic abuse fund, or maybe Compass, family visitation, and Think 3D. They're kind of wrapped up a little bit with the domestic abuse fund.
Think 3D is not. So the domestic abuse fund is funded through a couple of different fees that come into the county. By statute, the domestic abuse fund, we are required, and the commission is able to identify grants to fulfill the purpose of that fund. And in the past, it's been a 40% to Children's Inn, 40% to Family Visitation Center, and 20% to the Compass Center. Whatever we collect into that fund in a quarter, the next quarter we disperse out to those 3 agencies on that allocation. So that number does fluctuate slightly, but between 67 and 69,000 is generally where it's been the last number of years. So we keep a $67,000 revenue and an expense in that fund, but whatever we bring in is what we pay out, but it's around that same amount. So Think 3D is a separate outside of that.
Is that some MacArthur funding there, or is that outside of that even?
So maybe Tom Greco wants to
Yeah,
add.
it is outside of the MacArthur funding, that particular request. So this request came in first, and then the MacArthur funding opportunity came up. I would recommend, if the commission concurs, to keep it in here just in the event that the MacArthur funding is not received. If the MacArthur funding is received, then we would still have, if the funding is received, then we can reallocate the $21,250. But certainly if it's not received, it would provide an opportunity for Think 3D to implement at least a portion of the Bridges program in the jail.
I'm okay with that, as long as I think that if they do get the MacArthur, if that grant does come through, then we would remove that from the budget, because they are essentially designed to fund the same thing, so we wouldn't want to duplicate that.
One I kind of have a hang up with is, it seems to me we've always been shorting the Compass Center, and I would really like to bring their funding up outside of the domestic abuse fund to the same level that we have Children's Inn and Family Visitation Center. So that would be about a $13,400 increase. I know they're asking for $31,600, but I just would like to see parity between those 3. Justification being a lot of their work is done court ordered, Definitely, you could argue that it is a benefit to the community, so
Commissioner Karski?
please.
One option would be that we could just reallocate that domestic abuse fund if the goal is to get parity there and give a third, a third, a third. The problem I have with picking nonprofits and is that, I mean, I can't, they're all great. I mean, they all are doing great work. And so I don't disagree with parity. I don't think there's necessarily a great explanation for right now how we do it, 40, 40, 20, and I'd be fine with reallocating it to a third, a third, a third.
Second option. Other discussion?
I kind of agree with what Commissioner Bender indicated. We all are aware of the fact that United Way, for the first time ever, did not make their goal this year, which is going to send some ramifications to their whole budget processing in the nonprofit world, probably. But there are people that have larger endowment funds that they could use if they choose to do that. So I think we can do the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 this year and then ask them for more information in the future after they go through their United Way application process. Because I think, frankly, there's going to be some consolidations of that industry.
It's kind of a paltry thing, but Family Visitation Center asked for $700, so do we
Yeah.
do?
So
33,
maybe just
33,
clarify,
34?
maybe what I'll do is clarify. So the Family Visitation Center and Compass Center just submitted one request that was inclusive of the domestic abuse money. Where Children's Inn didn't ask specifically for the domestic abuse money, they asked it for their donation. So there's a little bit of variance in how each of these agencies are submitting their requests. So where Compass Center has asked for $45,000 in total, what I did was listed their average for what they're getting out of the domestic abuse fund under that fund, and the amount over that is what you're seeing in the donation requests, because we historically have not given them more than around $14,000 out of the domestic abuse fund. And then same thing with Family Visitation Center. They asked for $27,500. That included their domestic abuse fund money. Children's Inn just asked for their donation. They did not specifically apply again for the domestic abuse fund because that's historically what they have done.
And
That makes
Children's
sense.
Inn has been getting 100 and they wanted to go to 120.
So they've gotten a donation as well as the allocation from the domestic abuse fund.
So they've gotten 126,000 in the past.
Correct, right around there. So it was 26,875 for 2023, plus they got their allocation for 23 of $91,035. So for 24, they were approved donation of 100,000, plus they were approved their 40% of the domestic abuse fund. So it's a little bit different. So I just want to clarify, like Family Visitation Center, that 700 is part of their overall request, but some of it will be could potentially be outside of the domestic abuse fund. We've not specifically had them ask for both funds, so perhaps that's something we need to do in the future.
So in our domestic abuse fund, just for budgeting purposes, I'm going to throw this out there. Why don't we just say our anticipated revenues are 75,000 and do 25, 25, 25?
25, 25, 25. Name them.
1,000, 1/3 each.
Oh, okay. Why don't we just say a third, a third, a third?
I'm just, 67,000 is hard to divide by 3 is,
It's going to be roughly $22,000 and some dollars.
Yeah.
So that's $22,000 each is $66,000. So roughly it'll be about a $5,000 decrease for Children's Inn and Family Visitation Center if you shifted those dollars to the Compass Center. And then they would go up from about $13,400 to a little over $22,000.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the idea is to try to hold the entities harmless while we transition to this a third, a third, a third.
Pretty much.
I don't, from historical purposes, I don't see the data coming in the domestic abuse fund to support much more than $70,000 coming in. As you can see, the last few years, it's all been under 70,000. So unless there's a lot of marriages and divorces coming up in the next year, you know, which that varies, right? History doesn't show that we'll have more than 70,000, but that could always change.
I guess, Susan, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I'm just a little confused about the difference between the line items under the domestic abuse fund and under the donation section. So if we were to make this change that we're talking about to 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, would that have a direct impact on that request that the Children's Inn has under the donation section?
No, they would be separate. So the
Okay.
domestic abuse fund is separate, a separate fund. The ones under the donation section are those paid out of the general fund.
And maybe I misunderstood, but did you say then the Children's Inn requested 120, but built into that was the understanding that 26,800 was going to come from the domestic abuse fund?
They did not specifically say that. Historically, what they've done is just submitted a request for the donation, knowing that the domestic abuse fund is a separate allocation. So their request is for the donation portion. When the Compass Center did their request, it was all inclusive and a much larger request. So again, part of this confusion could be just how I listed it on here. You know, we could certainly have listed all 40,000 or 45,000 of the Compass Center's request under the domestic abuse fund. We could have done that as well.
And maybe to help me understand, could I say if we look at 2023 actual for Children's Inn, $91,035, and then down below Children's Inn, $26,875. So did they receive both of those amounts added together?
Correct.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
What another option, since we already do Children's Inn under the donations, just remove them completely from the domestic abuse fund and revisit how we allocate that. Anybody want to talk about that? Nope.
I'm kind of back to my point of if we want to go to a third, a third, a third, I think this one year we give an appropriate donation above the line, if you will, to make them whole, because obviously by going to a third, a third, a third, that change adversely affects Children's Inn and Family Visitation Center. So by maybe $4,000 or $5,000.
That's what I
So do we just give them $4,000 or $5,000 above the line and make them whole on that change, and then we just level set for years going forward? We know it's a third, a third, a third, an equal distribution, and if they have some compelling case for why they need an extra donation, we debate that kind of above the line. But the domestic abuse fund can just be an equal share.
I like that idea because it's the same thought process I was using. I'm just trying to figure out different ways to get there, but basically we're just taking a few $1,000s and putting it above the domestic abuse fund to make that process, as you say, whole with prior years.
Is that enough?
Can we talk about what other things you guys might want to change so that we know the total amount of dollars we're talking about here? We can
Sure.
kind of
Yeah,
set that aside and
Yeah,
then
we can
come back to it.
if we're just a few $1,000s either way to make those numbers add up, we can sure come back to that one.
And I think we can, for next year's budget process on those three agencies or whatever agencies that are funded with domestic abuse fund, have them submit two different applications, one for the domestic abuse funding and one for the donation, so that maybe we get some clarity on what funding they're asking for. We can maybe have them differentiate a little differently next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair that they're generally expecting a both and kind of a thing, but I don't think that hurts for clarity purposes to do that.
Okay. If we're ready to maybe go on to a separate category, I wanted to maybe just throw out some advocacy for some of the economic development entities like Forward Sioux Falls, Sioux Falls Development Foundation, and Sioux Metro Growth Alliance. Just maybe not to the full element of their ask, but just saying that I think when they're driving a lot of the economic growth in our region, do we want to be stakeholders in that and contribute some reasonable amount, and knowing that part of that growth comes back to us in tax revenue. So we kind of have rowing the boat in the same direction there, but just put that out to my colleagues. I don't necessarily have a number in mind, but some increase for those 3 line items I'd be open to.
I would agree with that concept. Because fortunately, that is our development arm of the county's revenue sources. And if we ignore that, we're going to be, it's almost embarrassing that we only give the Development Foundation $500. That I think we need to be a partner like other agencies that are involved in this, including Lincoln County and the city of Sioux Falls. Because we're cutting revenue off if we don't support it, potentially.
You know, I'm okay with 2 of the 3. The 2 I'm in favor of is Development Foundation and the Growth Alliance, and probably taking each of them to the $10,000 number. They both do very similar work, very compatible with each other, but Sioux Metro Growth Alliance definitely is more focused on the rural areas of our community versus the Development Foundation. So, I mean, if we're looking at kind of upping the ante and being fair, I look at it and say 10,000 is just a number that jumps out for me.
I'd be supportive of that number. I think that's just a reasonable, especially I think Commissioner Benningham mentioned the Sioux Falls Development Foundation, $510. I don't know where that came from, and that goes back a few years, but I think 10,000 for both of those entities would get us just in a better place, and we can always adjust further in future years to come, but I would support that amount for those 2 entities.
Commissioner Bleinberger Bender?
I'm trying to let Commissioner Blyenberg have a chance.
I think I could see an argument to be made either way, and if the general consensus is to move forward with the 10,000 for those 2, I wouldn't be opposed. I'm curious how Forward Sioux Falls is different as far as what we would allocate. Just thinking down the road, if the question will be asked, why are they not equal? But I guess I'm not very familiar with the work that Forward Sioux Falls does either.
I would just chime in that Forward Sioux Falls is more of a economic development, almost capital campaign, like a United Way campaign, but they do it every 5 years. So that might be the proper time to revisit that amount, is when they're in the next tranche or installment of the Forward Sioux Falls campaign. We could have a new conversation with them and what level of contribution the counties is an appropriate. Obviously, that would affect mainly Lincoln and Minnehaha counties, but how the counties can be a partner in that economic development activity. But I don't mind keeping it kind of on autopilot until they get to that 5-year cycle. So I think that's completely rational to just leave that one as is.
I like that logic, Commissioner.
I'm fine with this.
I think, if I remember right, that campaign starts next year, at the end of next year.
Okay, so.
So I think I heard 10,000 each for Sioux Falls Development Foundation and Sioux Metro Growth Alliance.
Correct.
I would suggest that we leave the Sioux Empire Fair at the dollar amount that we've done in the past. They had a productive year last year, and I think until we have a long-range plan, that's comfortable for conversation for me.
Concur?
Yep.
I would support that.
Okay.
leave the fair where they were. Anybody know anything about Lutheran Social Services, the Family Violence Project that maybe fill in some blanks for me? Excuse me.
I think they took over a program that used to be run by another agency. And that's about the depth of my knowledge.
I'm looking at the commission office to see if they can pull up their request. If I recall correctly, they have a program that has a significant wait list for within the community. Do you have the details, Meredith?
Yeah, so they recently got United Way funding for a full-time employee that processes the assessments. And then once the assessments are processed, these individuals get added into an MRT domestic violence group. And so this request would be for a 0.5 FTE staff for facilitating those groups. So because they have this new hire, there's more of a need for more groups. Currently, they have 110 individuals enrolled in those groups and 7 individuals on the wait list. So this would be would help get more of those individuals into those groups to help.
Is this court ordered?
I am not
Not certain. Sorry to put you on the spot. Okay,
yeah,
that's
no,
fine.
I can try and find that, but yeah, so it would, because they currently have a wait list. With this new hire, that wait list is probably going to increase until they get a new person in to facilitate more of these groups.
Okay. I'm okay with leaving it as it is, pending further information or, further analysis on my part, I guess. As it was, I guess, last year, not with the new request, but as it was, yeah. Okay. Any other changes or requests that we want to discuss? All right. Do you have enough to compile?
Can I recap what I understood?
Please.
That would be all right. We'll increase the ambulance funding from $75,000 to $90,000 for each of the 3 ambulances. We'll include Think 3D Solutions at this time, pending the response back on the grant. If the grant is received, then this would be removed from the funding, but for now, we'll add it to the budget. We'll include increase Sioux Falls Development Foundation and Sioux Metro Growth Alliance to $10,000 each. And then on the domestic abuse fund, we'll separate the allocation down to a third. And then for Children's Inn and Family Visitation Center, we will do a total amount in the donation section to essentially right-size them with the total amount they received in '23.
Boy, I couldn't have explained it any better.
Okay.
Can I just ask one
Please.
question? I'm wondering if it would be easier for you, instead of cutting another small check to Family Visitation, since we don't already support them, it doesn't look like, if we just took it all out of Children's Inn and put it into Children's Inn, so that, because you're already making a check to them.
Either way is fine.
Doesn't really
I think
matter
it will-
to you?
I mean,
Okay.
I think it'll be a pretty simple way for us to do it either way. So if we want to go with the idea of a third, I think we can make it work.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. All cool?
Did we decide what we're gonna do with family, or the Compass Center, I'm sorry?
Well, my understanding is we'll increase their domestic abuse funding up to be a third, so that'll be approximately about a $9,000 increase for them. So they'll go from about $13,400 to $22,000 to $23,000, depending on how the math works. So not the full amount of the request, but an increase from prior year. And theirs would be only within the domestic abuse fund.
Yep.
And then for the Family Visitation Center, were we going to make them whole, so to speak, to get them back to their 26.8?
Correct. We'll put an amount up in the donation section for both the Children's Inn and Family Visitation Center to make them whole.
Okay. And did we already discuss the contract for animal control?
We did not in detail. I did indicate that because it is a contract, I did include the 75,000 requests along with, that does not include the after hours and the mileage, so the actual amount on the budget is slightly above the 75,000 to accommodate for that additional fee. Those numbers are in the budget. The contract itself for the Humane Society does not come forward to the commission for review and approval till later this year. So I think there's time to discuss that request on that fee later, unless the commission office has any other insight to add.
I think we nailed it.
Okay, are we good to move on to highway?
Yep.
All right. We wanted to circle back on the highway fund. Just to start with, this is the highway fund summary showing beginning cash reserves, revenue, and expenses. We kind of went through this last week, so I don't have a lot of anything additional to add, but we wanted to start with this before Steve dives into his discussion on wheel tax revenue and other items within his fund. So we can turn it over to Steve.
Please.
I'll start with this slide. This shows what our percentage of revenues goes to total road and bridge construction. That includes pavement management programs and our contracted construction, which would be road projects, larger culvert projects, and our bridge construction projects. The third column from the right is our recurring revenues, and then the second from the right are state grants. Most of those, I believe, are previous years, but the 3 years I've been here, those are the big funds, the bridge improvement grants, and then what the total revenues are to the right. The reason we kept the recurring revenues on there is the state grants for the big programs. A lot of those times, if we're not successful getting those big awards, we're not going to do those projects, especially on the township bridges, unless there's a dire need. But one thing you'll notice is the amount that pavement management's gone up. As you know, that we have an excellent ride quality. We had our roads surveyed again last year and the results were encouraging. The ride quality stayed high. You'll be getting an in-depth report from our consultant sometime later in July. But the costs of doing micro surfacing, bituminous overlays, crack sealing, chip seals have gone up tremendously the last few years. It would be even worse if oil hadn't stayed steady. If oil had gone up the way they were projecting a couple years ago, the numbers would be even worse. So as long as oil prices stay where they're at, we're in decent shape. But next year, 2025, you'll see under contracted construction, we had to jump it up to $5.5 million. That's part of the reason why we had to trim some other things in the budget. The primary driver of that is the Highway 149 project heading south out of Colton. It's a phase 2 of a 2-part project where they did 7-8 years ago, they did the piece coming out of Hartford, those 4 or 5 miles, and now we're finishing the last 5 miles of Colton. We're up there this year, we're gonna be doing the widening and the approaches, and then next year it'll be cold in place recycling and paving. And the other big number in that is we have the bridge on Highway 104 west of I-29 that isn't probably gonna be posted, if not this year, the next year, and we're being proactive, being it's a major freight corridor, to go ahead and do that in-house. We were unsuccessful in getting big fund grants for that. Unfortunately, part of the reason it's hard to get big funding without the structure being posted. You get more points for having it posted, but we don't want to get to the point where that structure is posted because you got CHS and other big companies up that way. That would be a negative impact on those companies.
Can you go back, Steve?
Yes, sir.
Why the 30-some% increase in pavement management? Why is that taking such a big jump?
Based on our recommendations from Stantec, it's the amount of maintenance in the overlays and the microsurfacing to keep your ride quality high. Our ride quality number is very high. It's very unusual for this part of the country to have a rating that high. And that's the amount that they recommend that we spend on pavement management just to keep our ride quality at that excellent level.
So, I mean, is that the actual physical road, or are we talking a contract with somebody that surveys the roads? Is it?
The company that made the recommendation, Stantec, they went out and surveyed the roads.
Okay.
And they looked at the condition of the roads, and then they developed a maintenance plan for each segment of road, based on the ride quality and the condition of the road, the width of the road. And some of it's pavement management, and some is they'll recommend construction projects also.
Mr. Chair, Steve, can you go into the recurring revenues again, just defining that term? How, because I know we're going to talk some about wheel tax. That's not all wheel tax, but what are the other component parts?
Other motor vehicle sales, licensing, mobile homes, STIP grants from the state. There's probably 12 or 15 different categories of funding that we get. It's all based on user fees for transportation. There's no general fund dollars in that. We're the only county in the state that is the highway department is completely dependent on user fees, and we take 0 general fund dollars.
And if I'm comparing a previous slide to this one, the wheel tax is maybe $3 or $4 million, so
Correct.
maybe a quarter of that recurring revenue is wheel tax.
Correct.
Okay.
And then 2029, you'll see contracted construction is real high again. Part of the requirements to submit for big fund grants is you have to have the project in your 5-year capital improvement program. So there's a lot of projects listed in there that are strictly based on funding.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question, Mr. Chair, on the state grants for 2025? Are those estimates, or are those grants we have received? I forget the timing of the big grants or other state and other grant funding cycles. Where do we get the 2.15 million?
Those are grants that we were successful getting this year.
Okay.
Those are projects that will go in 2025.
Okay, so that's not anticipated. So in our, this may be a problem with like future forecasts and whatnot. We don't know how many grants we'll even apply for or how many we'll get. But that 2.15 number is a hard number that we have received.
Correct.
Okay.
Hopefully, if we're successful, that number will stay consistent, but then you'll also have, our projects will also increase, because that will free up projects that are in the hopper that we need the state funding to complete those projects. But here's some different wheel tax scenarios. I just want to, last week we kind of were focused on the 2 points for the big fund, and that's a part of the benefit of increasing wheel tax, but it's not the main driver. We are in good financial condition. The fact that we're going to have $4 million budgeted in the highway fund at the end of the next year, that's something to be proud of yet. We're doing a lot of projects next year, and we're still able to keep that kind of a balance. But our concern is going forward in future years that as pavement management and other costs go up, if oil would happen to start going up again, it's just going to be an impact on our operations. We're going to have plenty of money to keep our trucks running, keeping the snow blowing, ditches mowed, everything else we need to do. It's just how much is available to do bridge and other road construction projects. There's some different alternatives here. The big fund is based on 6,000 gross vehicle weight. That's why there's a category there. Currently, we collect overall $3,795,886.92 in wheel tax. And then that's split between, the county gets about 90%, 5% goes to cities and 5% goes to townships.
So option two, the $4 a wheel, the $5 over 6,000 GVW, that give you extra big points?
Yes.
Does, okay. And, been a long day. There was another question there. I don't remember. Oh, what's a 6,000 GVW? Is that a half-ton, three-quarter-ton, one-ton truck typically?
Between a 3/4 and a half ton based on the manufacturing, but most of the time it's going to be a 1-ton vehicle.
Okay.
I'm interested in the comparisons to neighboring counties. Can you give me the, if you know by chance, what McCook County's rationale there is with the $5 per wheel with a 4-wheel maximum?
That's just Commissioner Kipley, that would be what their commission would have decided. I don't know if that was 5 years ago or.
Okay.
It's just one of the multiple options. Probably half of the counties, if I recall looking at the list, do the full $5, 12-wheel maximum that you're allowed per statute.
Okay.
And then there's a lot of variations off of that.
And that would be the bottom line on your projections there, $5 per wheel, 12-wheel
$12
maximum.
Correct.
The amount collected would be 4.9 million, and that would be a $1.1 million increase over our status quo.
Correct.
But if we have two competing goals of wanting to get as many big fund points as possible and wanting to keep taxes as low on our citizens, option two might give us the most bang for the buck.
Yeah, Commissioner Kipley, that's correct, and it also leaves more options in the future. As we going down the road, if the maximum stays at $5 a wheel, 12-wheel max per statute, codified law, gives future commissions and highway superintendents other avenues to possibly need, if they need to raise funds in the future.
And is it fair to say that those heavier weight vehicles, just by design or just by definition, do more wear and tear if it's a use tax on our roads?
Yes, sir. The heavier the weight of the vehicles, the more use our roads are getting and the more they'll need maintenance.
Okay. So there is some rationale for making that distinction for the heavier weight vehicles.
So the 9,000 that the county doesn't get, is the rest go to the townships?
Townships and cities.
Echo what Commissioner Kipley said, it's that we're probably giving up big funding by not doing it. Is the necessity to do it there, though, is kind of the dilemma that I'm in. I mean, we really don't have to, but we're still walking away from funding if we don't. And what's fair and what's not fair to the taxpayer? And then you can go to the argument of, well, heavier vehicles cause more damage too, and it'd probably only be fair that they pay an extra buck over, it's such a small amount, but it does make a difference, obviously. So to say I'm conflicted on it would be an understatement, because it's such a small thing to me. It's like fairness. So,
Do you have the historicals on how long we've been at $4 per wheel? Just from a inflationary standpoint of.
No, I don't. We could do the research on that.
I'm hearing from staff about 2000, so about 20 to 25 years we've been at $4 per wheel, where if you're just thinking about the costs of pavement preservation plans and things like that, I mean, going from $4 to $5 is a 25% increase, I guess, nominally, but.
if you had the extra points, Steve, that option two would have given you, what would have that meant to you on potential big funding?
We had one bridge on Highway 110 that we submitted for in January of 2023 that we lost by 1.5 points. There's no guarantees that that bridge would have been awarded, but obviously it would have been right there. That was a $1.8 million ask at 80% funding. So not having those 2 points potentially cost us $1.6 million in state funding. And that's a bridge that right now we're working on the design and the funding criteria with our consultant SEH, with the plan of resubmitting in January of next year.
I really appreciate the quality of our roads and the fact that we don't use general fund dollars to help balance this budget. I like the idea of making better use of our resources. So the extra points is a really tempting and thought-provoking concept. I understand the logic, but I'm just curious, with this $4 per wheel, $5 over the 6,000 GVW, and then the 4-wheel maximum, is that something that's laid out for us as an option in the statute, or do we have leeway to change that? And I guess what I'm getting at is following the logic that the larger, heavier vehicles create more wear and tear on the road. Would it be possible to flip that and say 4-wheel minimum, so that the larger vehicles were the ones that were incurring more of those costs?
Commissioner, that's the way it's written in the criteria, but I don't think you see too many 2 or 3 wheel vehicles that weigh over 6,000 pounds.
And if I could, I don't know if maybe Commissioner Blyenberg is also just alluding to option 3 there, to go to capture the 12-wheel maximum, to go for some of the truly bigger vehicles.
Well, and I guess, oh, sorry.
No, and yeah, I'm just pointing out the difference between the second option and the third option. But if that's
And
relevant.
maybe I misunderstood, but I guess I thought that the 4-wheel maximum going to $5 would mean that vehicles with, say, 8 wheels or 10 wheels would only be paying the $5 on the first 4?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you originally. So if there was a 12-wheeled semi-tractor, which would be a tandem tractor with a tag axle, they're only paying the wheel tax on 4 wheels. They're not paying on the full 12.
And so maybe correct me if my logic is incorrect, but if we were to reverse that from a maximum to a minimum, that would mean that a 1-ton pickup would be paying $4 per wheel, I think. And
They
then
would be, if you were 12-wheel maximum, if you had a pickup truck, you'd only be paying for the 4 that you actually have.
can you say that again, Steve?
You paid, on that third scenario, the 12-wheel maximum, you're only gonna pay on the actual number of wheels that your vehicle have. So if you had a dually pickup, you have 6 wheels, you'd pay $5 on 6 wheels, you'd pay $30.
Okay, and I guess maybe I should say my driving logic was trying to achieve the extra points with the least amount of impact on our taxpayers.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are doing, I think you're doing a very good job of maintaining good roads with the highway fund. So it's not, I don't feel like we have a justifiable need to increase what we're taxing. And so I would love to get to those 2 extra points to increase our likelihood of achieving the grant funding for those big projects with the minimum impact on the taxpayers. And I was just trying to think outside the box and see if there was any way we could make that happen.
Well, I think option, if I may, option 2 probably does that because 90% of the people registering their vehicles don't have that GVW of 6,000 pounds. So that option 2 would not result in any sort of increase to, by far, the vast majority of the people licensing their vehicles.
Yeah, 250,000 vehicles would see no change. It's only the 22,600 that are 6,000, over 6,000 would be paying the increase.
And they're
So it's
probably
not
owned
even
by a
touching.
smaller percentage of the population because
Yep.
it's contractors, et cetera.
Yep, that definitely is the option if we pursue this that I would be the most in favor of. I was just trying to see if there was any way we could even narrow it beyond that.
When would an action date have to be on this, July 2nd?
Commissioner, it could really be any time you want. Traditionally, it seems like it's been around September timeframe. It would require an ordinance. And just to clarify, the last ordinance was in 1995. That's typically when the previous commissions have seemed to do it. So you would want to have it in place certainly prior to next year.
You know, I'm all in favor of getting more money from the state if this gives us a reasonable chance to increase that. I don't want to approve it quite at this point to move forward, but I think this is a good discussion. I think, or I'm hoping that some people are paying attention. I'm looking for feedback from the public on it, so I'd like to hear more from people on this item. And nobody wants, obviously to pay more, but at the same point, when we can improve the outcome for everybody by a significant amount, a lot of things to weigh there. So I'm in favor of just letting this back burner and maybe bringing it. Our final budget approval is in September, first week of September?
Final budget approval would be mid-September to late September.
Mid-September, okay. And maybe anybody object to kind of feeling this out for a few months?
I don't have a problem with it when I look at the numbers and how long it's been since it's been increased. I mean, option number 4 doesn't even, the increase in the taxes doesn't even pay for one of your trucks.
No.
That's crazy.
Okay.
We had one other slide on big funding if you want to see what all goes into that. And it's a 100-point maximum. It takes a lot of over half of the bridge, over half of it, 50 points actually is on the bridge condition. And then the user impact is based on average daily volume and then how long of a detour is involved if there is a problem with the bridge. Local planning, that's where our wheel tax comes in. There's a maximum of 10 points, $5 wheel tax on over 6,000 GVW gets you the $5, you get $4 for 8. Bid ready review, that's something that we've been doing on all of our submittals, is we'll spend the money to get them final design so that you get those 10 points. It pays for itself there. And then it's the amount of funding that the agency is promising to pay for that structure. And right now, to get those 2 points up, I would have to get 74% state funding instead of 80%. So basically, it's $100,000 less in funding on a $2 million bridge.
Say that again. So you're talking about the bottom bullet point?
Yep. The more local money you are committing to the project, you get additional points. We had the bridge in Red Rock Township that 2 years ago was out for bids, and we pulled the bids because numbers were going to be coming in high. We resubmitted it, just trying to get to our 50 points, which seems to be a number that you're successful at. We actually did a 60-40 application that time and was successful. So that's one of the formulas I play with to try to get to that 50 points.
Okay.
3-year average is 48.5 points is what the lowest scoring grant's been.
Okay.
That's what I have for you.
The voice from detached body, Jen, anything to add? It always startles me when you start talking. I look around and like, where's that voice?
No, I have nothing to add. Thank you.
Okay.
Especially me because it's behind me. All right, well, thank you. Any questions, feel free to reach out. I'm more willing to.
If you hear any
discuss more.
feedback from, you talk to contractors more than we do probably,
Yeah,
so.
they'll grumble, but they all know there's,
Well, they pass it on.
yep, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Susan Beeman with the Auditor's Office again. We're moving on into the category of debt service. This slide is actually the exact same as last year, and I left it this way on purpose because I wanted to show you the change from 23 to 24. 2024 is the first year of debt service on the Juvenile Justice Center bond. The blue bar that you see is the bond redemption fund. That fund is fully funded with property taxes, so that's the main source of revenue for how those that debt service is paid for in the bond redemption fund. The pieces of debt that are serviced out of the bond redemption fund are the new Juvenile Justice Center bond, the jail bonds from 2017, as well as a courthouse administration building bond from, mostly it's the courthouse administration from a number of years ago. Within the bond redemption fund, the next time we'll have a payoff in that will be in 2028. So you can kind of see where that blue bar drops down in 2028. That bond is roughly a little over $900,000 a year. So for 2028 is when you'll see the next decline in the bond redemption levy. So as long as there's nothing new coming in, we'll expect to see about $900,000 drop off in that year.
Susan, just for clarity's, I mean, we talk about bond and we talk about building, but in reality, all the bond redemption is for capital projects such as buildings.
Correct.
Okay.
So it's just a matter of where that debt is serviced out of and
Yeah,
what.
which mill
Yes,
it's coming
correct.
from.
Yep. And we talk a lot about how the general fund is 70% public safety. I just want to point out again, with the majority of those bonds in the the bond redemption fund, that's also primarily debt service for public safety. So I just don't want to lose sight of that. We talk heavily about general fund public safety. That bond redemption fund also is. Within the building fund, much smaller amount of debt service there. That is the two larger bonds within that are relatively new, and those are for the highway shop and the equalization buildings. So those will be with us for a while. We do have a small amount that will fall off, which I referenced last week, for the human services building. 2025 will be the last year for that bond, but that actually does have a property tax opt-out. So for 26, the opt-out goes away, the bond payments goes away, net impact is zero. So I'll just pause there to see if you have any questions about debt service.
If I could just throw out one comment, I know maybe we'll talk about this in the building fund context or just at some point, but I know we're somewhere in the budget we put in money for campus master planning here, this main campus. And I guess I'm guessing this will be an important slide to look at potential timing of any projects that would come out of that, looking into the 2030s maybe as a project comes off. Maybe that's the time that we feel like the debt service is in a good place that we could add on. I'm guessing that will just be part of a campus master planning. What is our current debt level? What can we afford to do, and the timing thereof? I'm guessing this is an important graph for that.
Correct. I mean, as you look at other capital projects, it's always the discussion as to how we pay for that. Is it with existing cash? Is it a new bond? What does that new bond do to the tax levies? Is there a way to time that need for a new building with one bond that's dropping off? Those are all going to be part of that. I think as you proceed with your master campus planning, that'll be part of, is there some ability to do that? And that will have to be kind of reviewed as part of that.
I think we can move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the next topic is building fund. Very similar chart as to what we discussed on the highway fund, showing a beginning cash reserve as well as revenues. So one thing that's different in the building fund versus highway is there is a property tax levy that does fund the building fund. So you'll see that under the revenue. That is the predominant amount of source of revenue for the building fund. And then the expenses listed that you see here are a variety of projects that Mark Krinz is able to discuss in more detail. And then additionally, as we shared on the previous slide, we do have debt service related to the equalization building, highway shop, as well as the human service building. So about $1.4 million in debt service. So I'll just pause there, and Mark is available for more discussion on the projects as he'll be able to explain those in more detail.
Mr. Chair,
Questions?
I have a question on the revenue side. Can you walk me through these past couple of years and some adjustments related to interest income and investment adjustments? I know with the high interest rates, that's been a hot topic here, but just this revised budget 2024 seems to be a low number. So can you just walk me through that?
Right, so as the rates, as we've talked a lot about interest income and the rates being about 3 times higher now than they were a year and a half ago. So when we kept the budget, when 2024 budget was done, we kept it at the historical amount of about $60,000 for interest income. In 2022, there was an assignment of dollars into the building fund that increased the amount of cash in the building fund. So then between the interest rates as well as the cash on hand, that increased our interest revenue. About 1 million of that 1.3 million is related to the assigned money. So it's part of the assigned fund balance within that, not the restricted money. So with the rates higher, and this is something we've talked about last week as well, we have been conservative again on our 25 budget. So you can see we increased the interest income. That is a conservative number. Will it probably stay higher than that if rates stay as high as they are? But again, I don't have that crystal ball of how quickly they will drop. At this point, the majority of that interest is related to the assigned, not the restricted money.
And so just to dive into that, so the restricted money doesn't earn interest, or what's the distinction?
It does. It's just the restricted money is the dollars that are coming from the property tax levy. So it's restricted by statute. The assigned dollars are related to the dollars that were assigned by the commission. So the interest off of the assigned money we want to keep into the assigned category versus the interest off of the restricted. So both earn interest. It's just a different, based upon the ratio of them, how much money is there. That makes sense?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. At our next budget meeting, we probably should have a discussion on our cash reserves and our building fund and kind of long-term philosophy on what that's going to be for, or do we already have something like that?
You talking about building fund in particular?
Yeah.
There definitely needs to be a discussion about it. One of the recommendations of the FAN regarding that cash reserve was to maintain it until effectively some sort of master plan has been put together and there's an identified use for, it could be potentially used for building projects. And just to very briefly address the master plan, it is budgeted, if approved, within the building fund for next year in the amount of $250,000. And I think, if approved, the commission would want to look closely at the timing of a master planning process. For this building in particular, this is probably our building most in need of replacement. That would, the life on this is expected to about 2032 before we completely outgrow it. But of course, there are other considerations that would need to be taken into account to include the courts, but also other facilities throughout the county.
Yep. Okay. Well, something to look forward to anyway. Okay. Any other building fund? Commissioner Bender.
Is there any statutory limit on what we can have, how much we can have as cash reserve in this fund?
I don't have that answer off the top of my head, but I can be prepared for next time to answer it.
Perfect.
Great question.
Yeah,
I was kind
thanks.
of thinking it, but yeah.
Because that was, if my recollection is correct, was that the 22 to 23 change? We had too much in our general fund and we put 10 million into this fund? Is that the history on that jump from 20 million to 30 million?
A couple pieces. I do think the limit on the building fund, and again, I'll research it to confirm. I believe there's a max levy that we can levy. So I think it has more to do with the levy amount than the cash balance. But again, it's restricted and assigned. There's no unassigned money in the building fund. What Commissioner Kipley is talking about is unassigned money. So the general fund has a stipulation within STCL that says we can't have more than 40% unassigned money in our general fund of next year's appropriation. So that's where the question, maybe some of the confusion can come into be, is just that's the 40% limitation is on the general fund.
Okay.
All right. It's been an hour and a half. I know we got a little bit of time left. I'm starting to lose a little focus. Can we take a 5-minute break? Yep.
You're the boss.
No, well, no, not really, but I'm in favor of a 5-minute break. Back together, guys. Susan, you're still up. We so appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Yes, and everybody's favorite topic is ARPA.
Yeah, I don't even know if 5 years from now we remember what ARPA means, but yeah.
Okay. And Jen, we still have you?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Very high level, we wanted to give you just a really brief overview of ARPA. You know, you see this every quarter, but we don't necessarily break it down into ongoing versus one-time expenditures. So what we're trying to do with this slide is just kind of show you where we have been as far as expenses for ongoing versus one-time and break it down by year. So this top section is ongoing expenditures for the various different departments. I'll just make a note within personnel-related expenses that there's a variety of different general fund departments and other departments in there. So far this year, for ongoing expenses through May, we've had just over $1.7 million of expenses to date. For 2023, for the full year, it was just under $7.6 million. For 2022, it was $4.2 million. So through May, we have spent on regular ongoing expenses roughly $13.5 million. We anticipate through the end of the year an additional $6 million. That'll bring our total use of ARPA dollars at this point projected to be about $19.5 million through the end of this year. And then under one-time expenses, you'll see about $15.4 million year-to-date through May, with an additional $2 million yet for the remainder of the year, which one-time expenses just over $17.5 million. So that brings the total of each of those categories around $37 million, with our total approved award just over $37.5 million. So that leaves, and I'm going to use air quotes, $433,000 of unallocated. And why I use air quotes is it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have haven't identified potential uses. There's a lot of estimates in those remaining expenses for 2024. So I tried to be conservative in those estimates. So there's a number of options we have within already existing county planned expenses that we can use that $433,000 for, including some potential for 25. I just don't know exactly how much money will be left at the end of the year to know how much will be left for that. It could be $100,000. It could be $300,000. So it's something that our office is monitoring every month. Every month I'm tracking these expenses. And by this fall, if there are projected to be some of those dollars unallocated, then what we will do is come back to the commission and provide some potential options for 25 expenses to be used for those. For example, the mental illness department has $144,000 in their budget for next year related to the Avera contract for mental health hold for stay of medical screening. That has been paid for with ARPA. It could potentially be for 25 as well because that contract is already executed. So we could use ARPA for it next year. So if there's $140,000 left for next year, we could use those dollars for this contract. It's just going to depend on what dollars are left at the end of the year. And until we get closer to the end of the year, I won't know the exact amount. But based upon the contracts that we do have in place, I don't see any concern with that $433,000. So I don't know if you have any questions or want to dive deeper into any of these.
I mean, those numbers you're talking about are going to have a fairly minimal impact to our
Correct.
budget anyway, but it's good to know where it's going, so.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to be conservative in this estimate remaining 2024. I've tried to be conservative. So as we go forward, I expect those dollars actually to be higher. But I don't want to get to October and this 433 is actually now 750,000. So I want to make sure that we hit our targets and that we have a plan and have an ability to spend and obligate all of our award by the end of this year. And at this point, I don't see any concerns with that.
One
I ask a
clarifying
question,
question. Go ahead, Jen.
Sorry, Joe. Can you explain again or remind me what the 60,000 in the state's attorney's line is for?
Certainly. The PBK software is partially a one-time expense for them to roll out that software, and then they're paying about $60,000 annually in fees. So the $60,000 that is up for the remaining part of this year is just the ongoing fees. The one-time more related expenses were down in the one-time category.
Thank you.
Sure, I think my question was just, sorry if I missed this, the definition is we have to have it obligated by the end of this calendar year, but some of this will be expended in 25 and possibly 26, is that?
Correct. So there has to be, and I'll maybe put an asterisk on this as well. The U.S. Treasury has changed their definitions as we go. And so they changed them and they clarified things in November of last year. And then they modified those in spring of this year. And then there was a potential change by Congress in May of this year. So there's a lot of things that continue to move around. But I think it's pretty safe to say if we have all our funds obligated, which is a definition of orders placed for services or contracts in place by the end of this year, we are fine. That has been consistent. The piece that's been moving around is some of the flexibility on personnel, using the dollars for 25 and 26 on personnel related items, which we are not projecting to do at all. And so we've tried to have everything be obligated by the end of this year with a contract.
And I guess all I'm getting at when I'm asking some of that is, do we run into some kind of substantial fiscal cliff of we're using ongoing funds at what level in 24, 25, 26, that in those out years, 26 or 27, we actually feel the loss of the ARPA dollars? And maybe that's getting into some of your future forecast elements, but how does that work over 24, 25 when we've obligated these funds?
For the purposes of 25, all of the ARPA dollars are not planned to be used. There could be potential dollars used, maybe a couple $100,000 on a few contracts, if we don't have them fully spent by the end of this year. But the majority of ARPA for all of these ongoing things up in this category, all of that will be done at the end of 24. And this is something, as a county commission and the auditor's office, we've been talking about probably every time we talk about ARPA, is how we plan for this to go away. For example, all of the new positions that are funded with ARPA at this point, they were funded because there was a need. We chose to use ARPA dollars for the interim just as the grant was available, but we talked about how it needed to be prepared for those dollars to come back to the general fund for 25. So I think that's been part of their budget conversations the last 2 years, just to make sure we were prepared for that.
So is it fair to say that in this work here towards the 2025 budget, ARPA is no longer a substantial portion of any ongoing revenue? 24 was kind of our last year.
24 will be the last year.
Okay.
And that is a change from what we communicated last year at this time, because we had anticipated dollars in 25. But again, that clarity from the U.S. Treasury in November that really clarified their definition of obligation, we had to kind of adjust our plan. And so at this point, 25 has no ARPA dollars factored into it, because we expect full obligation by the end of this year.
Okay, thank you.
Have we had any, excuse me, any Ide Bailey cost in doing
Hit your mic, Gerald.
audits? Sorry, losing my concentration. Have we had any ideally, I guess, input on any of the monies that we spent? Because there's been conversations at the federal level about they were going to be responsible for doing systematic audits at some point.
For Eide Bailey specifically, we did pay them a small amount in earlier this year for some consultation, just with that change in the definition of obligation to make sure that the items that we were proposing to use was allowed. So they did provide us feedback on our proposed usage, and then those they supported or they affirmed what our thoughts were. As part of our annual audit with Department of Legislative Audit, we do have a federal grant audit, and the auditors have to do testing on major programs. ARPA, obviously, due to the dollar amount, is a major program. So they did do testing last year for 2022. They'll do it again for 2023. They will dive down into what our expenses were, confirm that they'll review what we say was allowed use and confirm that they're in agreement. They'll do some testing on expenditures to meet their requirements. The federal government identifies for them what they have to test and give them requirements, and so they have to meet their audit guidelines. So that is part of our annual audit. So 22 audit was completed. They didn't indicate any concerns. 23, they're still working on the financial side of things. They haven't got to the grant side yet.
Do they charge us for that additional time? And is that something that's reimbursable under the grant or not?
It is part of our overall grant, it's a part of our overall audit, and it's part of our tax bill. If we needed to have an expense, we could, in theory, part out part of our single audit expense and get reimbursed under the grant. Just because it's all kind of commingled with other grant audits, we haven't done that at this point, but it is a potential expense if we got to a point where we needed something.
Well, we're getting towards the end, and when we talk about the 400,000, could be anything from 100 to 700. Frankly, that's 1/10 of 1% of what we have left for a balance, and I'm assuming that we will be getting a final report from the audit.
We will get, as part of the audit report, that grant schedule is embedded in that audit report when it's issued in late September. That identifies all of our grants. So for 2022, ARPA and South Dakota CARES were our two major programs that they tested. I am anticipating ARPA and South Dakota CARES again will be the two major programs they test. So if there are any findings through that, that is something that will be included in that audit letter that you guys will receive.
Thank you.
I'm ARPA'd out.
Well, hopefully
When somebody said they were going to forget and not know what ARPA means, I'm like, not me.
hopefully at this point, I really sincerely think that 433,000 will be lower than that. There's a couple of one-time projects through facilities that we're getting closer to when Mark will do bids, so we'll have a better idea on if there's any deviation from our estimate to know if there's any change on that dollar amount from there. The rest of them are all just, how many barrels we'll have, how many rental systems we have. They're just things that I can go off of history. But some months, we could have 2 times what a normal month is. It's just hard to predict. So I've tried to be conservative so that we don't get to the end of the year and have a big number that we're not anticipating. But honestly, I'm looking at this every month. So I don't want any surprises at the end of the year.
I think about the JJC and, I imagine that way the ARPA money parameters are that there could be something in there with the construction of that new facility, a security system upgrade or whatever that we could probably plug that into, but I'm not involved in all those talks, so I'm just throwing that out there.
We do have a lot of options. So, technically on this schedule, it shows unallocated, but there is a number of options I think we have.
Shovel-ready
Yeah,
options.
right. And
Okay.
so as we get every month, every quarter past, as we get closer to this fall, there's things that we keep talking about. And so we will certainly continue to be in touch with the commission on those. And if we have any concerns, we'll let you know.
We really appreciate your work on
I was
this.
going to say, this
Amen.
is crazy, but you've done tremendous amount of work. We've benefited from not only the financial piece, but more importantly, from your supervision of that fund. That could be a big hassle for a lot of people.
It has been definitely a challenge, had a lot of moving parts, but everything we have done thus far is specifically enumerated in the final rule. So we haven't taken liberties as far as drawing odd conclusions. They're specifically identified as allowed expenses. So.
Yep. Moving on.
Yes, back to our forecast. So this forecast has not changed. We just wanted to bring this back up as you talk through the outside agencies as well as the new positions so that you have an idea of what's included. And just certainly see as we progress throughout today, if you have any questions related to this forecast, if you want me to go through it again, or where you wanted to head with this.
I guess the only question is, I mean, we included some of the outside agency funding requests. I don't think those final numbers are in this at this point, right?
Correct. So this slide has not changed from last week. So outside agency donations have not been included in here. So the items that we discussed today will need to be run through this. This scenario does include all of the new positions being included. So this does include all, all the general fund positions stay, that is reflected in here. Additionally, what's not included is last week you provided some direction on elected official pay, and then as well as retention bonuses. And then on last week's commission meeting, there was approval of 2 additional correctional officers. So those changes are not included in here. That's about $217,000 for all of those changes. So I'll run those through for this forecast for our next meeting to have an updated forecast.
Yep.
But our goal with this is to try to, as our cash has increased, as we planned for ARPA to be completed, we knew we didn't want to have all of that hit in 1 year. We didn't want to have big jumps and opt out, and so we've been doing incremental amounts the last few years to prepare for that. So now, as we enter 2025, you'll see using some of those cash reserves to bring that that line, this blue line, is our cash. 40,000. About 10 million of that, 40 million, 10 million of that is considered assigned, and about 30 million is about 25% unassigned fund balance. Just so you understand. So what we're trying to do is, on this model, just showing by the end of 29, having our cash be about 25% of unassigned.
To make sure I'm understanding this correctly, in your modeling here, that green line would reflect that there would be you weren't including any opt-out for 24 to 25, any new opt-out.
Correct. I'm not, this forecast is not showing or proposing any new levying of opt-out dollars in 25.
Okay.
If there's a desire by the commission to pass a new opt-out, we're not recommending at this point that any new opt-out be levied.
So it'd be just if we wanted to follow the recommendation of FAN that we do an opt-out at least a year before you would actually need it, so that you knew the funds were available.
Correct.
You could do that, but it wouldn't be levied, and that's what's reflected
Right.
here.
With our cash balance at its current state, there's really, at this point, there's no indication from our office that we would need to levy more. What we're recommending is we start using some of those reserves, as we've kind of talked about the last few years, to help transition out of the ARPA funding process.
That's a good distinction. So the green line is opt-out levied, not opt-out available.
Correct.
And I think as we've looked at it here so far for 2025, we're looking at neither opting out for more to be available nor levying anymore. Is that correct?
Well, I think that's part of the discussion.
Yeah,
is-
I'm open to discussion on that, but as it's mapped out here and on the next page,
Yeah.
I don't see any new
I do.
opt-out for 25.
Yeah, so I do have a potential new opt-out here under this scenario, and again,
Okay.
as I indicated last week, I don't have a crystal ball. So the inflation and growth metrics that I have in here for 26 are very possibly not close. I mean, it's based on what we have today, and as we heard in the commission meeting, that one of those TIFs, a very large TIF, is going to be rolling into growth next year. So that is not necessarily factored into this. So based upon 2024 budget and based upon this model of inflation and growth and pay matrix changes, you could be looking at needing to exercise and use your opt-outs in 2026 so that, again, you can continue smoothing in the opt-out so that you're not having big jumps in any one year. You could, in theory, say, you know what, we're going to not opt out till we have to, but what that's going to mean is you're going to have a bigger jump in opt-out in any one year, and that's just going to push things down the road. You're not going to necessarily get to a different place. It'll just be the numbers of how you get there will be different, if that makes sense.
A lot of sense. And philosophically, my thought is, approving an opt-out without using it is just kind of building that line of credit, in a sense, that the county has, that we know that we have this here if we need to get to it, instead of doing we could be looking at in 2026, 2027, a $10 million opt-out all at once.
And we do know, and in the forecast, we have annual increase in positions of about 750,000, but another big component of that is the UC3 expansion in the jail. So there are sizable dollars in the 26 and 28 columns related to the jail expansion for additional staff. Those are dollars that are multi-million-dollar years. And so although we've also included additional for bed rentals, the bed rentals aren't going to offset all of that. So those are also in there. So again, you could say you want to delay this and not pass one, but eventually you're going to end up needing to pass more. It's just a matter of timing and how much.
And then just again, not saying I'm in favor or not in favor of an opt-out, but just reading this chart, we did a $1.5 million opt-out last summer.
Correct, and it
we
was
did
not
not
levied.
levy. And then this, according to this chart, if it's a perfect crystal ball, the first levying of that would be in 2026, where we'd actually dip into those dollars.
Correct.
Okay. But then, is it that bottom row where you're saying a potential new opt-out?
Right. So this potential new opt-out is just a scenario for you to consider. Trying to keep those dollars somewhat flat and no big spikes in any one year. As we get into 2027, we know we're going to have the one opt-out expiring. So we know that we have to have dollars available to do that. And then as you get into 2028, you have more UC3 expansion dollars coming in. And then if as those things smooth out, just trying to figure out how we can, again, increment that opt-out in versus having big spikes in opt-out in both the passage and the levying.
And then another follow-up on that is you do anticipate, according to this graph, 2026, we would need to dip into new opt-out that is not opted out yet. So if we're trying to follow the fan and staying 1 year ahead,
Right.
we might need to do some opt-out this year to account for that $500,000 to $1 million. You've got it at 878 as just a ballpark figure, I'm sure.
Right.
But
And right now, 2024 through May, the graphs for May financials were on this week's commission under the report section. I mean, things are still trending favorably. Interest is still high. But the Fed's kept interest rates the same again for another month. So it's just a matter of we're trending favorable for 2024. Whether or not the whole year will stay that remains to be seen. So in theory, if we still stay as favorable as the first 5 months are, you're looking potentially that you wouldn't have to levy new dollars in 2026. But again, I don't have that crystal ball. So this is just that scenario of using these assumptions. This is kind of what it looks like.
Well, this is at least one scenario where in 2026, we might need to do something by then. So do we want to take action now in the 2025 cycle to stay one step ahead of it? But so I think that's for valid discussion.
And Susan, you don't have a crystal ball, but you've been pretty good so far, so I'll go with that. My suggestion and my desire would be to approve an opt-out as illustrated at $2.5 million. It would have to be done at the July 2nd meeting, so we would need to have the, whatever it is, resolution prepared for our meeting in 2 weeks, I guess, don't rush it, for $2.5 million, or if, at least having a resolution prepared. If it's, we can amend it to, if we want 1.5, we want 3, whatever, but at least have a resolution prepared for the next meeting. Thoughts?
Yes, I think maybe pending sitting some more with the numbers, but I think we have to have a resolution prepared. That should be on our July 2nd agenda. I agree with that.
My big deal is not so much about the budgeting issue, but the whole issue of reducing the percentage of cash applied over the next few years. Because I don't care what you budget, if you don't have cash, it makes no difference. I mean, that's just the stupid accountant in me. Cash is the name of the game.
And I agree with you that the dipping into that cash applied target higher than an 8%, which is where the county has been for a number of years, is in different territory than we have been. Yep. And what from my chair, what I would say is it's going to require careful cash management from the commission, the auditor's office, the treasurer's office on the investments as we move forward. And that's partially why you see that decline of using the reserves over 5 years. Because if, in theory, we could do it all at one time, right? But then once it's gone, it's gone. And so what we want to do is be prudent in how we do it, careful how we do it as we go forward, because none of us know what the next couple of years will bring. So we want to be prepared to be able to go in a different direction if we need to. And so that's why under this scenario, you see a slowly using of it and not doing any 1 year too much or in a high dollar amount, just so that we can adjust as necessary.
Jen, you want to weigh in on this?
Could I ask a question of Susan? What, when you were just discussing slowly, incrementally, what line should I be following to track that?
So, Jen, when you look at this, the chart that I have up, the cash applied, that 10.5%, 11%, 9.5%, that's that total amount of appropriations. Historically, the county has used an 8% cash applied target. Right now, 1% is roughly $900,000, or if you want to round up, roughly $1 million. So in a year of 11% cash applied, we're suggesting about dipping into reserves by about $3 million. And so, again, this is going to continue to evolve as we move through the forecast, as we move into each year. As we know more, this will be adjusted.
And I think I agree with your logic that we want to do that slowly and incrementally, but I was trying to wrap my brain around what it would look like. You said we could, use it all and deplete it. And I know you weren't suggesting that as an option. I was just trying to visualize what this sheet would look like. Would that be taking 2025 or 2026 to 12 or 13%? Again, just trying to understand what you were saying.
Yeah, I have another file that is a lot more busy that I didn't share in the presentation that talks about how I calculate this. We could prepare a slide showing you what it would look like if you didn't layer it in and just do it when you needed it, if you wanted to see that.
I don't feel like I need to see it. I was just trying to visualize as you were speaking, the different options.
So like in theory, like we have about 3 million here in 2026. So you could bump 2026 up to about a 14% cash applied rate, not do any of this opt out here. But then what's going to happen as you get into 27, you're still going to have those cash needs of 3 million. It's now going to have to be addressed in 27 and 28.
Got it. This method, I really appreciate you laying out for us year after year. It's very helpful.
I'd like to quote Commissioner Bender, at least I think it was Eugene, that said, keeping things predictable and reasonable. And I think the predictable side is the important part of kind of leveling the cash applied out, because if you did it all at once, that predictability for the taxpayer in Minnehaha County goes out the window.
Could I make one request of Susan, back up a slide, back to this green line being the opt-out levied? Could we, if we're considering an opt-out and the scale of that opt-out for this year and or kind of forecasting what we'd maybe need to do the next year, could we get another line on there? So the green line is opt-out levied versus what you've got in your forecast for that kind of bottom line of somewhere between 2 and 4 million a year, the actual opt-out capacity. Basically just trying to track that line needs to stay above the green line by definition, but also trying to see how far ahead of ourselves do we need to be kind of to stay 1 year ahead at least, is if the fan's kind of giving us that guidance. But I think visually that would be helpful to me to see how that line is progressing as well. And do they run on basically parallel tracks, or do they always have a certain amount of separation from each other? That just might be some insight into what amount we would pick as a number for this year.
I'll see what I can do.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Means of finance.
Well, one last thing on the cash applied illustrations. This is that slide that we previously discussed. It's just similar to what exact same one that you saw last week. As presented, the cash applied was 9.56%. If you approved all of the general fund positions, 737,525, our cash applied rate goes up to 10.39%. So with the change in the outside agency donations, as well as those other compensation changes from last week, this will change again. So as we move forward into the next meeting, we'll have those dollars included in an illustration for you. The means of finance, you saw the first 4 funds last week. So now what we wanted to do is just show you the entire means of finance. So it's over the course of 3 slides. I don't plan to read all these numbers for you since it's a lot of numbers by lines. That you'll see in the first slide, we have general fund, highway fund, building fund, and the debt service fund. So I'll just pause there to see if anybody has questions on that. Okay. When we get into the next slide, you'll see emergency management fund. Just to point out on this, the majority of the emergency management fund is funded with general fund dollars, because we have some federal grants coming in and state grants to help fund that program, but a large portion of that is general fund dollars. Under the capital projects fund, I'll just point out, you don't see a big expense for a construction project. That is because that's included in the 24 budget. So any dollars that remain for 25 will be part of the carryover process that you'll look at early next year. Okay, and then on the third slide, you'll have museum store, museum enterprise, M&P fund, which is the Register of Deeds Monitoring and Preservation Fund, Rural Access Fund, and E911. A couple of things to point out here. Rural Access Fund, this should be potentially the last year you'll see this fund as they spend out the remaining dollars that they're receiving from the state, unless there's a change in legislation that allows for more additional dollars in future years. And then additionally, one thing that is missing on this fund, or on this slide, is the COSAP fund, which is a grant through the Sheriff's Department. That ends in 2024, so that fund has been removed. That is the last slide there, and then we just have any additional discussion or communications to be had.
Okay, so we're gonna have a resolution prepared for an opt-out to maybe be modified at the July 2nd meeting. We've discussed the staff, we've discussed the outside agencies. What am I missing? What do we need to talk about?
Commissioner, if I could, I would just, two things, recommend that we take the information, and it would be Susan doing this. She does a great job at it, of course. Take it, incorporate it as discussed into the long-range plan, make the modification if possible with the additional line on the long-range forecast, I should say. And then come back to the commission next week. I would recommend not having a separate budget meeting, but rolling it into your regular commission meeting, probably towards the end. But including that long-range forecast updated with the information taken from today, and also presenting an updated means of finance and cash flow analysis. So a handful of slides. There was a comment that you may want to revisit the one organization, Lutheran Social Services, at a future meeting. So we'll tee that slide up as well and provide a little more information regarding their request. But I think basically that setup will give you the tools next week to maybe finalize a discussion on an opt-out. Regardless of that, we'll still come back on the 2nd with a proposed resolution. But that should basically put you in a position by the end of next week to receive one more budget presentation in mid-July, which you would file with the auditor's office as the provisional budget.
Okay. So next Tuesday, added to our agenda will just be the final budget discussion. I think that's a good common sense way to approach that, so, okay. Any other commission comments or input?
You do wonderful work. The only question I have is that 5% quote bad debt reserve that we use for uncollectible taxes. That's a requirement by law, right?
We are required by state statute to have that 5% holdback in any fund that has property taxes. So you'll see that on the means of finance for general fund, building fund, bond redemption. As purposes of our cash flow, that 8% cash applied target is really that 5% holdback plus about a 3% underage of expenses. The last few years, we've collected 99% of our property taxes. So we feel pretty comfortable with that. When we budget that 5% holdback as part of our cash available, we feel pretty comfortable with that. But it is required to be displayed that way by state law.
Yeah. That was gonna be my question, is how that 5% is brought through the numbers to the bottom line. But if we're required by law, we don't have much choice.
Yeah, we are required to show it that way on the means of finance. When I'm doing my forecasting, I'm forecasting that all of that will be in. And then I'm forecasting that 3% underutilization of expenses. So that 3% of savings on expenses is also included in the forecast.
All right. To anybody who's been watching this for 5 hours on CityLink, get a life. I mean, congratulations.
You need a life.
No, we appreciate people watching. It's just been a long day already. Okay. Have an opportunity for public comment if anybody would like to address the commission. Look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same
Aye.
sign. We are adjourned.